Hello, just trying to get my PowerPoint up here. Okay, so I'm Laura Lewis. I think my camera might be off. I'm just going to turn my camera on. Oh, here we go. So my camera on. So I'm Laura Lewis, and today's class is about the kingdoms of life and taxonomy. So I'm just going to open our PowerPoint up. Just bear with me. Here we go. So kingdoms of life and taxonomy. So this is part of GCSE biology for all OCR, Edexcel, AQA and other exam boards. So you need to know about this. It's kind of the beginning of biology, in my opinion. So you have to know about the kingdoms of life before you kind of do anything else to do with biology. So let's look at our learning aims today. So number one, an understanding of how living creatures are divided into the 5 kingdoms. Number two, an overview of the main classes of chordates. So if you don't know what that means yet, you will find out what a chordate is, and how living organisms are given binomial names. So that's the overview. So we'll go back to that as we go along. Okay, so you've got two main divisions of life. You've got the prokaryotes and the eukaryotes. So you may have heard of this before, key stage 3, about prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So eukaryotes actually means, in Latin, it means good seed or good kernel. But that means in biology, that means got a nucleus. So eukaryote, so we're eukaryotes, our cells got a nucleus. If you're a prokaryote, you don't have a nucleus. You have like a nucleoid or a plasmid. Okay, we don't really tend to focus too much on prokaryotes at GCSE, more A-level biology, but you have to know kind of the difference between them, because you may come across a prokaryote at some point in an exam question. So sometimes as I go along, I might point out things where exam questions may try and trip you up, because there's one coming up later about fungi that they tend to use. So I'll highlight those points as we go. So in other parts of biology, you'll learn a bit more about the other parts of the cell, but our main sort of aim is to know the difference between a prokaryote and a eukaryote. Okay. So we've got the 5 kingdoms as an overview first of all. So I'm just going to move my camera up. So you have the animalia, or the animals. You have the plantae, or the plants. Okay, so these are the Latin names. The fungi, also fungi, they've got the same name. The protoctista, the protists, you might have heard them as, and the prokaryotes. So they're the 5 kingdoms that we will need to become familiar with, and we'll go into more detail about each of those in a moment. So that's the overview slide. Okay, so if you obviously want to take notes or screenshot that, okay, so that's a really good overview, but we're going to go into more detail. All of these, so animalia, the plantae, the fungi and the protoctista, are all eukaryotes. So the word eu means good, okay, so it means that they have got a nucleus in their cells. We'll come across to these, which are a very interesting group of living organisms. So these are all living organisms, okay, so they can all be categorized into one of these categories. Okay, so the kingdom Animalia, so they're the ones we're probably most familiar with, to be honest. Multicellular, so they've all got more than one cell. They've at least got 2 cells. Most of them have got millions of cells. I mean, human body have got millions from billions of cells. Okay, so heterotrophic feeders, so that means that they eat other organisms. Okay, they can't produce their own food. So like a plant, so you've seen them in the plantae produce their own food. So the word hetero means other, the word heterotrophic, so they're feeding on other organisms. That obviously could include plants, okay, because they're also organisms. No cell wall, okay, so their cells do not contain a cell wall. So if you sort of go back a little bit, is that this animal cell without a cell wall, but if you're a plant, you've got a cell wall, but the animals have no cell wall, so they're kind of sort of soft, squishy creatures in a way, as I always remember it, because like the plants are a bit more structured, aren't they? Like a big tree is a bit more structured. Complex cell structure with nucleus. Yeah, so we've got very complicated cells. Okay, you may have seen a cell under a microscope, but still probably with an optical microscope like you have at school or at college, you wouldn't have seen the internal structure, the organelles. You might see the nucleus, but nothing else smaller than that. You'd have to have a stronger microscope. They're actually very complicated. So I've included some types of the Animalia. Okay, so we're just talking about kingdoms. So that's the key point here. The kingdom Animalia. It's got lots of different things in it. Okay, so that actually includes the familiar animals that we know. Okay, so you've got all like the pets and things like the cats, the dogs, chickens, things like that. That's sort of the familiar animals we've got here. But some people miss out the insects. The insects are also part of Animalia. They're animals. Okay, a lot of people get caught out on the insects. Okay, dinosaurs, they were animals. Okay, so you've got extinct. You can in an exam they can actually give you an extinct animal. Okay, to look at because people get a bit. They think, oh, is that an animal? They sort of, but of course it was. It was an extinct animal. And then you get microscopic animals. Like this is a tardigrade. So even animals can be tiny, but they still can have more. The tardigrade's got a lot more than one cell. It's got many celled, but it's about 1 millimeter long. They're quite interesting creatures if you want to look those up after a tardigrade. That's called. So we'll go into a bit more detail about the Animalia and the subgroups a bit later. But we're just going to the kingdoms. Okay, so always refer back to this slide to look at. We're going over the kingdoms first of all. If you get a bit confused. Okay, the plantae, I think this is quite an easy one, isn't it? Because basically, I think that we know what a plant is, don't we? So plants are all your house plants, trees are all a plant as well. Tree is a type of plant. Mosses, okay, also the kingdom plantae, okay, the mosses. So they're multicellular as well, like the animals. Autotrophic, that's what obviously the main difference is, autotrophic. So that they can produce their own food. You probably know that by photosynthesis, using chlorophyll. So they have chlorophyll within their cell walls. Okay, they also have cell walls. As I was just saying, they have a cell wall made of cellulose. So when you eat something like celery, it's quite stringy. It's quite kind of hard to eat. That's made of cellulose. You kind of know if you got a, or you eat things like asparagus, you get out the woody bit. Like you know about that, don't you? Made of cellulose. Complex cell structure, they're also complicated like we are. Plants are not less evolved than we are, actually. It's quite interesting. In fact, sometimes in some ways they're more evolved. They're very complicated. They're not simple organisms. They're complicated like us. So it's important to know that they're also a complicated thing. Okay, next one. Next slide. The fungi. Okay, this is one that they like to catch you out on. I'll talk about that later in an exam. So I'm just going to talk about this fungus for a minute. That's a yeast cell. I've labelled it for you. A yeast cell. So they are mostly multicellular, but there's very, very, very rare examples of like yeast where they're actually single cellular. So I've actually seen that question in an exam where they have a yeast cell, one cell, and they've really tricked some students into thinking it's something else. When it's the same yeast as to make bread. Okay, that's actually that yeast. It's a single celled, but if you notice, it's got a cell wall, but no chlorophyll. Okay, because fungi do not photosynthesize; they don't need the light. Okay, so yeah, they're mostly multicellular, but very, very rare exceptions. Yeast is a single celled. Okay, so cell walls are not made of cellulose. They're not very like plants at all. Actually, they kind of superficially look like plants, but they're not at all. They're actually more related to animals, believe it or not. Saprophytic, so that means they feed on dead or decaying organisms, and they've got a very important role in the food chain. Okay, so they don't need chlorophyll. They don't need to make their own food. Okay, so because they feed on other organisms, and you know about that because you find it on your bread. If you leave your bread, I mean, the other day I forgot about some bread in the kitchen and it had some mold on it. Not quite as bad as this one, just a little bit of mold, but mold will feed on the bread. Okay. So it's actually funny because you make bread with yeast, which is a fungus, and then it can also be eaten by a different kind of fungus. They're all around us in the air. They have spores. Okay, so when you go into more detail, they have spores. Okay, that they release into the air. So this is only the outer part of the fungus called the fruiting body. Underground, it's got something called a mycelium. So most of the fungus you don't actually see; it's underground. This you probably know as a toadstool, okay, or it's called a muscaria, which is a very, very poisonous mushroom. But you may see that in the woodland, especially in the autumn. Okay, when it's all wet, and they like to, they feed on the decaying leaves. So they do fulfill a role. And these are the things you might see in the kitchen. Okay, these are edible mushrooms. Again, they're the fruiting body of the mushroom. Very interesting organisms, the fungi. So you might want to look those up as well. Let's move on. Okay, these are the ones that you might not know about. Okay, Protoctista. Okay, so they're mostly unicellular, fewer multicellular, complex cell structure. They're still complex, Protoctista. Okay, so slime mold, they're very interesting again, because that's not a good name, is it, mold? Because they're not a fungus. Okay, so be careful of that one. So slime mold. Amoebas, Euglena, I've seen that under a microscope, very interesting. It's actually, some of them can photosynthesize. This can photosynthesize. You won't be asked too much at GCSE about these, but you could ask a bit about Protoctista, Paramecium, diatom over in the oceans, and some algae. Okay, also protists. Okay, or part of the Protoctista. Yeah, it's a bit of a tongue twister, that name. Okay, so these ones aren't probably not as familiar with as the other ones. So I'm going to move on. A prokaryote. Okay, so these are the ones that are a little bit different, aren't they? The prokaryotes. So these are, you kind of think, these are all kind of things that cause harm to humans. They don't all cause harm, prokaryotes. It's just I kind of put these on here because people probably have heard of them. Unicellular, single-celled. Okay, simple cell structure, no nucleus. That's the important bit there, no nucleus. Salmonella, okay, known for causing illness. Okay, a lot of bacteria. Okay, all the prokaryotes. Staphylococcus, yeah, I know all the Salmonella. Okay, that's Salmonella is one. Electron microscope, you can't see it with an optical microscope like you have at school. It's much too small. Okay, but again, they're simple organisms. So most of the bacteria under here. Okay. Interesting, isn't it? I thought so. Yeah, this is always asked. Where do viruses go? Haven't mentioned a virus. They're not actually made of cells. Okay, so people obviously still debated on where they even should go. Sometimes they're known as called a different domain of life. Sometimes when you get to further on for GCSE, a domain. But as you can see, they're not actually a cell. You've got a protein coat. They're very, very different, okay, to any of the cells. So things like they've got like a protein coat. That's why people say to wash people's hands, is that they actually wash off what's called, they've got a protein or a lipid, so a fat coating. So oil actually washes off of the coat. Okay, on some viruses. All viruses look very different though. So each virus is slightly different to each other. So that's the influenza virus. But yeah, we don't have to worry about those in terms of classifying them in the kingdoms, because they don't belong to any of them. Okay, because they're not, that's the important bit, they're not made of living cells. So we're just going to look at the kingdom Animalia, okay, and the invertebrates and vertebrates. Thought this was a nice picture here. Okay, nice little, just give a little overview of invertebrates and vertebrates, nice little drawing. Okay, so you have the chordates, so also known as the vertebrates. Okay, the animals with a backbone. Okay, us. Okay, so example, mammals, reptiles, birds, fish, amphibians. So we're going to focus on Animalia and the chordates for our next slides. But we're obviously just going to mention the non-chordates, animals without a backbone. Examples, I mean, anything kind of soft and squishy, like an octopus or sponge. Sponge is an animal. You might not know that. Sponge is an animal. Arachnids, so the spiders. The insects. So they haven't got. They haven't even got skeletons. These things, have they? I mean, the insects have external skeletons. They don't have any backbones. They're not made of bones. Okay, they're not. They're made of different. Sometimes they're made of I think called chitin, which is a hard material, but not bones. So we're going to look a bit more at the chordates. Okay, here. So yeah, it's a bit more of an overview. So look at the vertebrates with the chordates. So the fish, the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds, and the mammals we're going to go into. Okay, so these are all, again, all part of the chordates. So mammals, we're mammals. Okay, warm-blooded, can regulate around body temperature. Okay, you have fur or hair. Even whales in the ocean have hair. Have a little bit of hair. Give birth to live young, so have babies. We'll say feed their young with milk. Okay, so all of the mammals do that. Once they have live babies, they feed the babies themselves. So examples: humans, us, cats, dogs, sort of like elephants, whales, dolphins, cows, horses, many different things, and mammals. Okay, so so yeah, it's from the word mammary because they feed their young with milk. That's where the words come from. I think most people are quite familiar with the mammals and be okay with naming a mammal. So the reptiles, I've got a pet tortoise, and this is what he looks like. Again, some people like pets are reptiles. So cold-blooded, so they need to be in a warm environment. Okay, that if in the winter you might have to give them a heat lamp because they can't actually provide themselves with heat. They have rough skin and or scales. Yeah, you can see that they've got skin, and some parts they've got scales, but it's rough, not very soft to touch. They lay eggs with soft leathery shells. Yeah, it's sort of soft. You may have seen crocodile eggs on television, sort of leathery. Or turtle eggs. So tortoises, snakes, alligators, crocodiles, lizards, sea turtles. Okay, and lizards. They're all part of the reptiles. Again, so quite again, it's a bit more of a familiar one. Amphibians. So this is where people get a little bit confused with amphibians. So they need to live in water for part of all of their life. There'll be a stage of their life where they need to be in the water. Okay, they have wet skin, so if you touched a frog, it'll be quite wet. And do not have scales. No, they're quite smooth. They're cold-blooded as well, so they need some kind of source of heat. Lay soft eggs. So think of frog spawn. So like the background is frog spawn. And need to be in the water for most of their life. So frogs, toads, newts. Okay, these things we're going. The axolotl, you might see that at a pet shop. An axolotl, but they're all amphibians. Okay. Birds. Okay, birds. Again, a bit more familiar with this one than amphibians. So they're warm-blooded. If you ever had a pet bird, they're quite warm. Have feathers and have feathers and wings. Okay, so they've got wings. Even a penguin has got feathers. They're just kind of suited for the water, but they've still got wings. Most can fly, but some are flightless. Yeah, penguins flightless. Chickens can fly to an extent. Okay, they can flap about, but obviously robins and eagles can fly, can't they? Garden birds can fly. They have legs with hard shells. We know that from chickens. Okay, you may have an egg to eat. They've got hard shells. They've all got beaks. That's an interesting one. A lot of people forget about that. They've all got beaks, so hard beaks to. They eat lots of different things. Fish, they eat seeds. Lots of different diets birds have. Okay, robins, yeah, eagles, chickens, penguins, yeah, pet birds, parrots. All, I think most people know what a bird kind of looks like. Okay, fish again, a little bit quite probably quite familiar with fish. Okay, so majority of lives in water, aquatic. That word is aquatic, because some fish spend a little bit of time outside, but they really need to go back in the water. Cold-blooded, as you know, some fish have to be in a nice warm tank inside. They don't like being too cold, most fish. Breathe oxygen underwater with gills, so they can actually, they're the only group that can breathe underwater. Okay, so lay soft eggs, okay, that are fertilized externally. So the female fish will lay the eggs and the male will fertilize them with sperm, so outside the body. Okay, so you may have seen that if you have again a pet fish or on a documentary. Lots of examples of fish as well. Obviously, the whole ocean is full of fish. Goldfish, obviously, you may have been familiar with. Sharks, they're fish as well. They're a type of fish, a shark. Salmon, well, you might eat tuna, you might eat. They've got some interesting ones here. Frogfish, got quite interesting faces. They're quite cute in a way. And this is the biggest fish in the world, the mola, or the ocean sunfish. Harmless to humans. Okay, I think they're quite funny looking fish. But these are all fish. Okay, they can be quite different. Is the point here? Okay, so that's the last group. Okay, so now we're going to look at binomial names for the last part. So binomial names are two-part. Okay, we only look at, so this is the actual how you'd organise naming an organism, its kingdom, its phylum, its class, order, family, but we only look at the genus and the species, okay, of the animal. So the first part of the binomial name is a genus. So this is a sunflower, so Helianthus is its genus. You can guess what that means. It actually means sunflower in Latin, sunflower, and its species. So that's in uppercase and that's in lowercase. So I've wrote out a few of them here. Annuus, so annual. That means it completes its life cycle in 1 year. Okay, so that's actually what that means. Got the dog, Canis familiaris. All dogs are the same species. Yeah, so that's interesting, isn't it? Okay, so humans have bred them to be different. The potato, Solanum tuberosum. Okay, so all living organisms can have a binomial name. Okay, you've got sort of my videos over here. Felis catus, that's where the word cat comes from, its species name. Okay, Felis catus. So the word cat comes from. And us, Homo sapiens. Okay, so all humans, we're Homo sapiens, all the same species. Okay, so I'm going to just go back over right at the beginning and just say what we talked about, just to finish off. Okay, sorry about that noise, it's a computer saying I couldn't go further. So we looked at understanding how living creatures divide into the 5 kingdoms. Okay, so go over that again, go to, if you've forgotten, or make notes. Overview of the main classes of chordates. So the classes, okay, were these, okay, the fish, the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds and mammals. And the last one, about binomial names, was looking at binomial names. Okay, so you could be presented with a binomial name of an animal that you might not even know, or a plant, okay, or fungus, you get a binomial name of, and you have to say that's a genus and that's the species, Solanum tuberosum. So Solanum, that's a nightshade family, also in the same family as tomatoes, actually, the potato. Tuberosum, because these are tubers. They've all got names, they've all got reasons why they're called that. Okay, so thank you for joining the class, and we'll finish up there for today, and hope you come to other classes too, because I've enjoyed presenting this and hope you've enjoyed it too. Thank you very much. Goodbye.